November 18, 1945. Camp Shanks, New York. Morning fog rolls off the Hudson River as a transport ship docks carrying an unusual cargo. 173 German women in threadbare uniforms descend the gangplank. These are not ordinary prisoners. They are Nachrichtenhelferinnen, female auxiliary communication specialists captured during the final collapse of the Third Reich. American MPs expect defiance, perhaps tears. Instead, the women walk in formation, silent and dignified, their faces betraying nothing of the terror they feel. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sergeant Martha Hendricks watches from the processing station. She has prepared for this moment, studied the protocols, reviewed the Geneva Convention requirements. But nothing in her training prepared her for the reality of women prisoners. These are not soldiers in the traditional sense, yet they served in Wehrmacht installations from Berlin to Prague. They operated switchboards that connected generals to frontline units. They encrypted messages that directed panzer divisions. They decoded intelligence that cost Allied lives. The processing begins at 0900 hours. Each woman receives a medical examination, clothing issue, barrack assignment. The routine mirrors procedures for male prisoners, but the atmosphere carries a different weight. American female personnel conduct the examinations, conscious of the dignity these women have already surrendered simply by surviving Germany's defeat. Nurse Captain Eleanor Vasquez notices the malnutrition immediately. Prominent collarbones, sunken cheeks, arms thin as birch branches. One woman, barely 20 years old, weighs 87 pounds. Camp Shanks sprawls across 400 acres of former farmland, overlooking the Hudson. Originally designed as an embarkation point for troops shipping to Europe, it now serves the reverse function, processing returning soldiers and housing prisoners awaiting repatriation. The female section occupies a converted warehouse complex on the eastern edge of the facility. Two-story wooden barracks, painted olive drab, surrounded by chain-link fencing topped with concertina wire. Guard towers stand at each corner, though the guards rarely need to demonstrate their authority. The women arrive at their assigned quarters in mid-afternoon. Barrack 7, a long rectangular structure with 32 bunks arranged in 2 rows. Each bunk includes a mattress, 2 wool blankets, a pillow, and a footlocker. Windows line both walls, allowing natural light and fresh air. A potbelly stove sits at each end of the building. The accommodations exceed anything these women experienced during the final months of the war, when they slept in bomb shelters and abandoned cellars while Berlin crumbled around them. Ilse Bachmann claims the bunk nearest the eastern window. 26 years old, former supervisor at Wehrmacht Communications Center in Leipzig. She joined the Nachrichtenhelferinnen in 1942, motivated by patriotic duty and the promise of meaningful work. Her brother served with an infantry regiment on the Eastern Front. Her father died in the First War. Military service felt like heritage and obligation combined. Now she sits on an American mattress in an American prison camp, wondering what comes next. The first meal service arrives at 1800 hours. American mess personnel wheel metal carts into the barrack common area. Steam rises from covered trays. The smell hits the women before they see the food. Roasted meat, baked goods, something sweet and unfamiliar. Sergeant Hendricks supervises the distribution, watching for reactions. The Geneva Convention mandates adequate nutrition for prisoners, but the American interpretation of adequate would shock anyone familiar with wartime European standards. Each woman receives a metal tray divided into sections: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, fresh bread with butter, and, in the corner section, something golden and crumbly that none of them recognize. The women eat in silence, processing the abundance. The chicken is real chicken, not the ersatz meat products that became standard in Germany after 1943. The potatoes are actual potatoes, not the turnip substitutes that filled German rations. The bread is white bread, soft and fresh, unlike the dense black bread mixed with sawdust that German civilians ate during the final year of the war. But the golden crumbly substance in the corner generates whispers. Greta Zimmerman, former encoder from Hamburg, prods it with her fork. The texture is wrong for cake, too coarse for pudding, too soft for bread. She takes a cautious bite. The taste is sweet, but also savory, with a gritty texture that dissolves on the tongue. She makes a face and sets down her fork. Around the room, other women sample the mysterious food and reach similar conclusions. Whatever this American creation is, it fails to impress German palates accustomed to rye bread and potato dumplings. Anneliese Fischer, youngest member of the group at 19, laughs quietly. She spent 6 months at a listening post near Munich, monitoring Allied radio traffic and learning to identify American voices by their regional accents. She knows some English, picked up from intercepted conversations and armed forces radio broadcasts that Wehrmacht intelligence monitored for propaganda purposes. She asks Sergeant Hendricks about the golden substance. "Cornbread," Hendricks replies, "Southern specialty. We serve it with most meals." The translation spreads through the barrack. "Maize brat, cornbread." The women exchange glances. In Germany, corn is animal feed, not human food. The idea of making bread from corn strikes them as confirmation of American peculiarity. They have heard stories about American excess, American waste, American strangeness. Cornbread seems to validate every stereotype. Several women push the offending item to the edge of their trays, untouched. The evening passes quietly. The women arrange their belongings in footlockers, make their bunks according to the standards they learned in Wehrmacht service, establish the routines that will structure their days. No one discusses the war or their service or the defeat that brought them here. Those topics remain too raw, too dangerous. Instead, they talk about practical matters: the temperature in the barrack, the quality of the blankets, the schedule for tomorrow. Lights out comes at 2200 hours. Darkness fills the barrack, except for moonlight streaming through the windows. Ilse Bachmann lies awake, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of American captivity. Guard boots on gravel paths, distant voices speaking English, the rumble of trucks on the main road beyond the fence. She thinks about her mother in Leipzig, wondering if she survived the Soviet occupation. She thinks about her brother, missing since the Courland pocket collapsed. She thinks about the cornbread and feels a strange embarrassment at rejecting food when so many Germans are starving. Morning arrives with November cold seeping through the barrack walls. The potbelly stoves provide some warmth, but the women dress quickly, adding layers against the chill. Roll call happens at 0700 hours in the yard outside the barrack. American personnel count heads, confirm everyone is present, dismiss the formation. The routine echoes Wehrmacht procedures, offering the comfort of familiar structure in an unfamiliar place. Breakfast service begins at 0730 hours. The mess carts return with fresh loads: scrambled eggs, bacon, fried potatoes, toast with jam, orange juice, coffee. And again, in the corner of each tray, a square of golden cornbread. The women eat everything else with varying degrees of enthusiasm, but the cornbread remains largely untouched. American abundance is one thing, American peculiarity is another. Lieutenant Rachel Morrison observes from the doorway. She commands the female prisoner section, responsible for security, welfare, and compliance with international law. She has dealt with male prisoners during her 2 years in the service, but women prisoners present different challenges. The Geneva Convention makes no distinction by gender, yet practical reality demands adjustments. Privacy concerns, hygiene requirements, psychological factors that differ between male and female populations. Morrison notices the rejected cornbread and makes a mental note. Cultural preferences matter. The War Department guidelines emphasize respect for prisoner customs and dietary traditions. If the women dislike cornbread, the mess personnel can adjust.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
But something in the pattern of rejection bothers her. This is not mere dislike. This is dismissal based on preconception. The women reject cornbread without giving it a fair chance, just as they perhaps rejected other ideas without examination. The morning work assignments begin at 0900 hours. The women are divided into groups for various tasks: laundry detail, barrack maintenance, kitchen support, administrative work. The assignments avoid anything that could be construed as supporting the American war effort, though the war in Europe ended 6 months ago, and the war in the Pacific concluded in August. Still, protocols must be followed. Ilse Bachmann draws kitchen duty. She reports to the main mess hall, a cavernous building that feeds 3,000 personnel daily. American cooks supervise German women in food preparation tasks: peeling potatoes, washing vegetables, preparing ingredients for the next meal. The scale of operations astounds her. Industrial mixers, enormous ovens, walk-in refrigerators stocked with meat, dairy, produce. The abundance makes her think of German ration cards, the endless queues, the progressive deterioration of food quality as the war dragged on. Head cook Staff Sergeant Samuel Washington runs the mess operation with military efficiency and Southern hospitality combined. He hails from Georgia, grew up on a farm where cornbread accompanied every meal. He notices the new German workers and decides to bridge the cultural gap through the universal language of food. During the morning break, he prepares a special batch of cornbread using his grandmother's recipe: real buttermilk, fresh eggs, bacon drippings, a touch of honey. He bakes it in a cast-iron skillet until the edge is crisp and the center stays moist. At 10:30 hours, Washington presents the fresh cornbread to the German women working in the kitchen. He cuts generous squares, still warm from the oven, steam rising when the pieces separate. He offers them without comment, just a gesture and a smile. The women hesitate. They remember last night's rejection, feel the social awkwardness of refusing food offered directly by their captor. Ilse accepts a piece out of politeness. She takes a small bite, expecting the same disappointing grittiness from the previous evening. Instead, her taste buds register something entirely different. The warmth releases flavors that were absent in the cold, reheated version served in the barrack. The buttermilk adds tanginess. The bacon drippings provide richness. The honey contributes sweetness that balances the corn's natural flavor. The texture is still unusual by German standards, but in this fresh, properly prepared form, it works. She takes another bite, larger this time. Around her, other women experience the same revelation. Greta Zimmerman, who made a face at yesterday's cornbread, now eats with evident appreciation. Annalise Fisher, the young woman who laughed at the concept of cornbread, reaches for a second piece. The transformation happens in real time, visible on faces that shift from skepticism to surprise to acceptance. Washington watches with satisfaction. He has seen this reaction before, though never with German prisoners. Food prejudice usually dissolves when people taste something prepared with care and skill. His grandmother taught him that cooking is an act of love, and even enemies can recognize love when they taste it. He cuts more pieces, ensuring everyone gets seconds if they want them. The rest of the morning passes differently after the cornbread revelation. The German women work with slightly more engagement, slightly less reserve. Small conversations develop, limited by language barriers but facilitated by shared tasks and Washington's patient demonstrations. He shows them how Americans prepare collard greens, black-eyed peas, sweet potato casserole. Southern cooking, he explains, through gestures and simple words. Traditional recipes passed down through generations. Ilse begins to understand something that escaped her during the war. America is not a monolithic entity. It contains regions, cultures, traditions as varied as those in Europe. The cornbread represents Southern American identity the same way black bread represents German peasant culture or white bread represents Prussian refinement. Food carries meaning beyond nutrition. It communicates heritage, values, belonging. Lunch service at 1200 hours includes the fresh cornbread that Washington prepared. The women in Barrack 7 receive their trays and notice immediately that the cornbread looks different. golden brown instead of pale yellow, crusty edges instead of uniform texture. They taste it and recognize the improvement. Word spreads quickly. The American cooks can make decent cornbread when they try. Perhaps other American things deserve reconsideration. The afternoon brings new activities. Educational sessions conducted by American personnel and German-speaking civilians recruited by the War Department. These sessions avoid direct political content, focusing instead on practical information. English language instruction, American geography, constitutional principles explained in neutral academic terms. The goal is not propaganda, but preparation for repatriation to an occupied Germany where understanding American systems will prove useful. Annalise Fisher attends the English class with genuine interest. She already knows basic English from her intelligence work, but formal instruction offers opportunities to improve. The teacher, Mrs. Dorothy Callahan, is a middle-aged woman from Brooklyn whose German is excellent. She spent 10 years in Munich before the war, married to a German professor who died in 1938. She returned to America reluctantly, leaving behind a life she loved. Mrs. Callahan teaches with empathy and firmness combined. She corrects pronunciation without condescension, explains grammar without tedium, encourages conversation without forcing political discussion. Her approach wins respect from women who distrust obvious propaganda. During the session, she mentions cornbread as a vocabulary example. She describes regional American foods, explains that cornbread varies by location, notes that Southern cornbread differs from Northern cornbread, which differs from Southwest cornbread. This information surprises the German women. They assumed cornbread was cornbread, a single American oddity. The revelation that it exists in multiple regional variations suggests complexity they had not considered. Mrs. Callahan senses their interest and expands the discussion. She talks about American immigration history, how different ethnic groups contributed dishes to American cuisine. German immigrants brought sauerkraut and bratwurst. Italian immigrants introduced pasta and tomato sauce. Irish immigrants popularized potatoes. Chinese immigrants added stir-fry techniques and rice dishes. The class ends at 1500 hours, but the women leave thinking about cultural exchange and adaptation. They have spent years viewing America as the enemy, a distant abstraction defined by propaganda and military opposition. Now they are beginning to see it as a real place, inhabited by real people with regional identities and cultural traditions. The shift is subtle but significant. Dinner service at 1800 hours features fried chicken, coleslaw, baked beans, biscuits, and cornbread. The women eat everything without hesitation now, including the cornbread. Some even request additional portions. Sergeant Hendricks notices the change and reports it to Lieutenant Morrison during the evening briefing. Morrison records the observation in her daily log. Small victories matter in prisoner management. Acceptance of American food suggests psychological adjustment to captivity, reduction in resistance, openness to new experiences. But Morrison understands the deeper significance. These women are not simply accepting cornbread, they are beginning to question their assumptions. If they were wrong about cornbread, what else might they have been wrong about? The question plants seeds that will germinate slowly over coming weeks and months. Seeds of doubt about Nazi ideology, about racial superiority theories, about the propaganda that shaped their understanding of the world. Evening free time allows the women to socialize, write letters, read books from the camp library. The library contains German language books, mostly classics, that passed American censorship. Goethe, Schiller, Thomas Mann, authors who represented German culture without Nazi contamination. The women devour these books, hungry for connection to their cultural heritage after years of propaganda that narrowed acceptable literature to party-approved texts. Ilse Bachmann writes a letter to her mother, assuming it will reach Leipzig eventually through Red Cross channels. She describes the camp, the food, the treatment by American personnel. She mentions the cornbread story, knowing her mother will appreciate the irony. She writes about the abundance that surrounds her, the comfort that contrasts sharply with Germany's current devastation. She does not mention the guilt she feels about eating well while Germans starve. Some truths are too painful to commit to paper. The letter will take months to reach Leipzig, if it arrives at all. Soviet occupation authorities control mail flow, and correspondence from German prisoners in American camps receives low priority. But writing the letter provides emotional relief regardless of whether it reaches its destination. The act of organizing thoughts into sentences, of imagining her mother reading these words, of maintaining connection across impossible distance, all these things help Ilse process her circumstances. Lights out at 2200 hours ends the second day. The women settle into their bunks with less anxiety than the previous night. Familiarity breeds comfort, even in captivity. The routine provides structure. The adequate food provides security. The respectful treatment provides dignity. These things matter more than they realized when they still possessed freedom. The days that follow establish patterns that will define the women's experience at Camp Shanks. Morning roll call, breakfast, work assignments, lunch, educational sessions, dinner, free time, lights out. Within this framework, small changes accumulate. English vocabulary expands. American customs become familiar. Cultural barriers erode gradually through daily interaction with American personnel who treat them as human beings rather than enemies. The cornbread becomes a running joke among the women. They laugh about their initial rejection, mock their own prejudice, use the incident as shorthand for lessons learned. When someone expresses skepticism about American practices or customs, others respond with cornbread references. Remember the cornbread. Do not judge before trying. Keep an open mind. The joke carries weight beyond humor. It represents a fundamental shift in perspective, a willingness to reconsider assumptions, an acknowledgement that first impressions can deceive. For women raised in a totalitarian system that demanded absolute certainty and punished doubt, this flexibility marks significant psychological progress. The third week of December brought unexpected challenges to Camp Shanks. A winter storm swept down from Canada, dumping 18 inches of snow across the Hudson Valley and dropping temperatures to 7 degrees Fahrenheit. The heating system in the female prisoner barracks struggled against the extreme cold. American maintenance crews worked around the clock to keep the potbelly stoves fueled and the water pipes from freezing. The German women wrapped themselves in extra blankets and gathered near the stoves during free hours, sharing body heat and telling stories from their lives before the war. Greta Zimmermann spoke about her childhood in Hamburg, where her father owned a bakery that produced traditional German bread. Dark rye loaves that stayed fresh for days, pretzels twisted by hand each morning, Christmas stollen rich with dried fruit and marzipan. The bakery survived the Depression, but could not survive the British firebombing in July 1943. Her father died in the flames trying to save his ovens. Her mother and younger sister evacuated to the countryside. Greta joined the Nachrichtenhelferinnen 2 months later, seeking purpose after losing everything that mattered. The other women shared similar histories: loss of fathers, brothers, homes, entire neighborhoods erased by bombing campaigns that turned German cities into rubble fields. They had served the Wehrmacht not from ideological conviction, but from a combination of patriotic duty, economic necessity, and the simple human need to contribute something meaningful during catastrophic times. Now they sat in an American prison camp, warm and fed, while their families struggled through the first winter of occupation with inadequate food and shelter. The guilt weighed heavily. Lieutenant Morrison recognized the signs during her daily inspections. Women who ate less than their portions, setting aside food as if saving it for people who were not present. Women who volunteered for the coldest work details, seeking physical discomfort as penance for their relative comfort. Women who isolated themselves, refusing to participate in educational programs or social activities. Morrison consulted with the camp psychiatrist, Captain David Rosenberg, who had studied trauma responses in combat veterans and concentration camp survivors. Rosenberg recommended increased engagement rather than isolation. He suggested structured activities that gave the women purpose beyond passive captivity. Useful work that contributed to their own welfare and perhaps to the welfare of others. Creative outlets that allowed emotional expression without requiring direct confrontation with painful memories. social programs that built community within the prisoner population while creating positive interactions with American personnel.
The kitchen became the primary venue for implementing these recommendations. Staff Sergeant Washington expanded his informal cooking demonstrations into structured classes. Twice-weekly sessions where German women learned American cooking techniques and American personnel learned German recipes. The cultural exchange happened naturally through the shared language of food preparation. Measurements translated through demonstration. Techniques communicated through repetition. Flavors transcending vocabulary limitations. Ilse Bachmann discovered an aptitude for baking during these sessions. Washington taught her to make American biscuits, showing her how buttermilk and baking soda created chemical leavening that produced tender, flaky results without yeast. She grasped the technique quickly, her hands remembering skills from childhood when she helped her grandmother bake bread in a farmhouse kitchen outside Leipzig. Washington praised her work and assigned her increasingly complex tasks. Apple pie with lattice crust, chocolate cake with buttercream frosting, dinner rolls that rose perfectly in the warm kitchen. The baking provided therapeutic benefit beyond the practical skills. Ilse found that working with dough required present-moment focus that quieted anxious thoughts about the future and painful memories of the past. The repetitive motions of kneading, rolling, shaping became a form of meditation. The transformation of raw ingredients into finished products offered tangible evidence of creation rather than destruction, growth rather than loss, hope rather than despair. Other women found similar solace in different activities. Annalise Fisher joined the camp choir organized by Chaplain William Torres. The choir included American personnel and German prisoners singing together in four-part harmony. They performed Christmas carols in both English and German, blending traditions from both cultures. The music created moments of transcendent beauty that reminded everyone involved of their shared humanity beneath the artificial divisions of nationality and wartime allegiance. Christmas Eve 1945 brought the most significant event in the camp's brief history as a female prisoner facility. Lieutenant Morrison approved a joint celebration combining American and German traditions. The mess hall was decorated with evergreen branches, paper snowflakes, candles, and glass holders. 2 Christmas trees stood at opposite ends of the hall, one decorated in American style with colorful glass ornaments and electric lights, the other in German style with straw stars and wooden figurines. The dinner menu reflected culinary contributions from both cultures. Roasted turkey and ham alongside sauerbraten and red cabbage. Mashed potatoes and cornbread alongside potato dumplings and dark rye bread. Apple pie and pumpkin pie alongside Stollen and Lebkuchen. The abundance overwhelmed the German women, many of whom had not seen such variety since before the war began in 1939. Staff Sergeant Washington prepared a special cornbread for the occasion using his grandmother's holiday recipe. He added dried cranberries and pecans, creating a festive variation that honored the season while maintaining the essential character of traditional Southern cornbread. He baked 20 skillets worth, ensuring everyone could have generous portions. The women requested seconds and thirds, their initial prejudice against cornbread now completely reversed. The evening program featured performances by both groups. The combined choir sang Silent Night in German, then in English, the 2 versions overlapping in haunting harmony. German women performed traditional folk dances, their movements precise and graceful despite months without practice. American personnel staged a humorous skit about life in the military, eliciting laughter even from prisoners whose English remained limited. Captain Eleanor Vasquez, the nurse who had conducted initial medical examinations in November, organized a gift exchange using materials available in the camp. American personnel donated toiletries, stationery, small personal items. German women created handmade gifts using cloth scraps, paper, found materials. The exchange happened with genuine warmth, small gestures of kindness between former enemies who were beginning to see each other as individuals rather than representatives of hostile nations. Ilse Bachmann received a fountain pen and a journal from Sergeant Hendricks. The gift touched her deeply because it acknowledged her humanity and her need for self-expression. She gave Hendricks a small cloth pouch she had sewn from uniform scraps, embroidered with a simple geometric pattern. The exchange required no words. The mutual respect was evident in the careful selection of gifts that matched the recipient's needs and interests. The evening concluded with a candle-light ceremony that drew on both Christian and secular traditions. Chaplain Torres spoke briefly about hope and reconciliation, about the possibility of building better futures from the ruins of the past, about the human capacity for forgiveness and renewal. His words were translated into German by Mrs. Callahan, who added her own observations about the importance of learning from history while not remaining imprisoned by it. The women returned to their barracks after midnight, emotionally exhausted but spiritually renewed. The Christmas celebration had given them something unexpected, not just material comfort or temporary distraction, but a glimpse of potential futures where former enemies could coexist peacefully, where national identities did not require hatred of others, where shared humanity mattered more than past conflicts. January 1946 brought new realities to Camp Shanks. The War Department began processing prisoners for repatriation to occupied Germany.
The logistics proved complex. Germany was divided into 4 occupation zones controlled by America, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. Prisoners needed assignment to appropriate zones based on their home regions. Transportation required coordination with multiple agencies and military commands. The process would take months to complete. The German women received preliminary interviews to determine their repatriation destinations. Allied intelligence officers questioned them about their service records, political affiliations, knowledge of war crimes. The interviews were professional but thorough. The Allies needed to identify hardcore Nazi supporters who required denazification programs and potential war criminals who faced prosecution. Most of the women cleared these screenings easily. They had served in technical roles without direct combat involvement or obvious criminal activity. Ilse Bachmann's interview lasted 2 hours. The intelligence officer, Major Patricia Donovan, asked detailed questions about her work in Leipzig, what communications she had processed, what military operations she had supported, whether she had knowledge of atrocities or war crimes. Ilse answered honestly, describing her role as a supervisor who coordinated message traffic but rarely saw content beyond routing information and priority classifications. She had suspected that horrible things were happening, particularly regarding treatment of Jewish populations and Eastern Front operations, but she had not witnessed anything directly and had not been in position to prevent or report such activities even if she had wanted to. Major Donovan's questions grew more pointed. Did Ilse believe in Nazi ideology? Had she joined the party? Did she support Hitler's policies? Ilse chose her words carefully. She had believed in serving her country. She had not questioned official narratives while the war continued. She now recognized that she had been complicit in a regime that committed terrible crimes, even if her individual role had been small and indirect. She felt shame about her participation and responsibility for learning the truth she had avoided confronting during the war. The honesty satisfied Donovan. She marked Ilse's file as cleared for repatriation without additional denazification requirements beyond the standard programs all Germans would undergo in the occupation zones. Ilse would return to the Soviet zone because Leipzig fell within Soviet-controlled territory. The prospect frightened her. Stories of Soviet treatment of Germans, particularly women, were widespread and horrifying. But she had no choice. Home was home, even if home now meant occupation by forces more brutal than the Americans. The repatriation timeline remained uncertain through February and March. The women settled into an extended limbo, knowing departure was coming but not when. The routine continued. Morning roll call, work assignments, meals, educational programs, free time. But everything felt temporary now, provisional, as if real life had been suspended and would resume only after return to Germany. The cooking classes took on new significance during this period. Washington taught German women to prepare American dishes they could potentially recreate in Germany once civilian life normalized. Simple recipes using basic ingredients that might be available even in an occupied nation with food shortages. Cornbread became a practical option because corn was relatively cheap and widely available even in devastated Europe where American aid programs were shipping surplus grain. Washington wrote out his cornbread recipe for the women, translating measurements into metric units and noting substitutions for ingredients that might be unavailable in Germany. He explained that cornbread could stretch limited supplies of wheat flour by replacing half the wheat with cornmeal. The bread required no yeast, eliminating dependence on supplies that were scarce in post-war Germany. The recipe could be modified based on available ingredients, accepting substitutions for buttermilk, eggs, or fat. Ilse copied the recipe into her journal along with detailed notes about technique. She had decided that if she survived repatriation and Soviet occupation, she would open a bakery in Leipzig, like the one Greta's father had operated in Homburg. She would bake traditional German breads but also introduce American innovations like cornbread and biscuits. She would create a place where people could find not just food but also community and hope. The dream sustained her through the uncertainty of waiting. April brought official repatriation orders. The women of Barrack 7 would depart on April 23rd aboard a military transport ship sailing from New York to Bremerhaven. From there, they would travel by train to their respective occupation zones. The news generated mixed emotions. Relief that the waiting was ending. Anxiety about what they would find in Germany. Sadness about leaving the relative security of American captivity for the harsh realities of Soviet-occupied Leipzig or British-occupied Hamburg or French-occupied Baden or American-occupied Bavaria. The final week passed quickly. The women packed their few possessions, attended farewell gatherings, exchanged addresses with American personnel who promised to write. Staff Sergeant Washington organized a final cooking class that doubled as a goodbye celebration. He prepared his grandmother's cornbread one last time, serving it with honey butter and fresh strawberry jam. The women ate slowly, savoring flavors they might not taste again for years. Washington gave each woman a small bag of cornmeal to take with them, a parting gift that was both practical and symbolic. The cornmeal represented American generosity, but also the women's own transformation during their months at Camp Shanks. They had arrived as enemy prisoners full of prejudice and fear. They were leaving as individuals who had learned that enemies could become friends, that cultural differences could enrich rather than divide, that preconceptions often dissolved when people shared meals and stories and music. Lieutenant Morrison conducted final interviews with each woman, documenting their time at Camp Shanks for official records. When Ilse's turn came, Morrison asked whether the experience had changed her perspective on America and Americans. Ilse considered the question carefully before answering. She said that she had learned Americans were not the caricatures Nazi propaganda had portrayed. They were people with regional cultures and family traditions and individual personalities. They could be generous or petty, wise or foolish, kind or cruel, just like Germans or any other nationality. The revelation seemed obvious in retrospect, but had required lived experience to truly understand. Morrison asked about the cornbread story that had become legendary among camp personnel. Ilse laughed and admitted that rejecting the cornbread had been foolish pride masking fear. The women had needed to reject something, to maintain some boundary between themselves and their captors, to preserve dignity through defiance, even if the defiance was petty and misdirected. The cornbread had been a safe target for resistance that hurt no one and cost nothing. But when they finally tasted it properly prepared, they had recognized their own prejudice and the possibility of change. Morrison thanked Ilse for her honesty and wished her well in the difficult times ahead. She gave Ilse a package containing stationery, stamps, and a recent photograph of the women in Barrack 7 gathered around the Christmas tree. The photograph would be a tangible reminder of this strange interlude when enemies had lived together in peace, sharing meals and music and small kindnesses that transcended the hatred and violence of war. April 23rd arrived cold and gray. The women boarded buses at dawn for the drive to the Brooklyn docks where their transport ship waited. The journey through New York City gave them a final glimpse of American civilian life. Buildings intact and functional, streets clean and orderly, people well-dressed and apparently well-fed, cars and trucks moving freely. The contrast with what awaited them in Germany could not have been more stark. The transport ship, a converted Liberty ship named the SS General Anderson, had been refitted to carry passengers rather than cargo. The women were assigned to converted hold spaces with rows of bunks stacked 3 high. The conditions were basic but adequate, far better than the voyage they had imagined based on stories of prisoner transport ships during the war. The ship would carry 800 German prisoners, both men and women, along with American personnel returning to occupation duty in Europe. The voyage took 9 days through rough North Atlantic seas. Most of the women suffered seasickness during the first few days until their bodies adjusted to the constant motion. They spent hours on deck when weather permitted, watching the gray ocean roll past, thinking about uncertain futures. Some wrote letters they hoped to mail from Germany. Others simply stared at the horizon, processing emotions too complex for words. Ilse spent much of the voyage in the galley, helping American cooks prepare meals for the passengers. The work gave her purpose and distraction. It also gave her access to ingredients and equipment for a final project. On the last full day at sea, with Bremerhaven just hours away, she prepared cornbread using the recipe Washington had taught her. She made enough for everyone in her section to have a small piece with their evening meal. The cornbread emerged from the oven golden and fragrant. Ilse cut it into squares and distributed them among the German women who had shared Barrack 7 with her for 5 months. They ate in silence, each woman processing her own mixture of memories and emotions. The cornbread tasted exactly as it had at Camp Shanks, which meant it tasted like an ending and a beginning simultaneously. Loss and possibility combined, like a lesson learned through experience rather than instruction. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.